There is a specific kind of stillness that doesn't feel like rest. You're sitting somewhere ordinary, a couch, a kitchen chair, the edge of a bed, and the phone beside you has been quiet for too long. Not long in the measurable sense. Maybe 20 minutes, maybe 30. But something in you has already begun to shift, the way barometric pressure shifts before a storm, invisible and total. You pick the phone up not because you need to, but because the silence coming from it has developed a weight, a presence, almost a sound of its own. The screen shows you nothing new. No red circles, no banners sliding down from the top, no pulse of light from the corner. Just a time, indifferent and clean. And yet your nervous system is already translating that emptiness into a language it was never meant to speak. The language of absence, of forgetting, of a world that has continued moving without sending you a single sign that you are still part of it. We don't talk about this one either. It doesn't have the dramatic shape of a panic attack or the recognizable contours of loneliness. It is subtler and for that reason more insidious, a low, persistent hum of unease that follows you through an otherwise normal day, coloring everything slightly gray without ever announcing why. You pour a glass of water and check the phone. You sit down to read and check the phone. You have a conversation with someone in the same room and feel, underneath your own words, the faint pull of the screen across the table, wondering what it isn't telling you. The notifications have stopped, and the part of your brain that learned to live on them, that restructured itself around the rhythm of their arrival, is now doing what any system does when its primary input is suddenly removed. It is searching. It is restless. It is quietly, persistently convinced that the silence means something is wrong. Consider someone we'll call Daniel, 31 years old. A person who by every external measure has a full life, work he finds meaningful, people who love him, a city that offers him everything he could reasonably want. On a Saturday afternoon, his phone goes quiet, not because anything is wrong, but simply because the world for once is not demanding anything from him. And instead of feeling the relief that a quiet Saturday should deliver, Daniel feels something closer to dread. He checks his email with the focused attention of someone expecting urgent news. He opens and closes 3 different apps in under a minute, not reading anything, just moving through them, the way you move through rooms in a house when you can't remember what you were looking for. He texts someone a question he already knows the answer to, just to have a reason for the phone to light up. He engineers a notification because waiting for one to arrive organically has become, in the space of half an hour, something that feels genuinely unbearable. And the most unsettling part is that he doesn't fully understand why. Daniel's afternoon is not a crisis. It is a portrait of what happens when a brain that evolved over hundreds of thousands of years to scan constantly for social signals, for the rustle in the grass, for the shift in the group's attention, for the subtle signs of inclusion or exclusion, is handed a device that transforms those ancient instincts into something measurable, quantifiable, and deeply unreliable. For most of human history, social signals were slow and embodied. A face across a fire, a hand on a shoulder, the sound of your name spoken in a familiar voice. But the brain adapted, as it always does, to the environment it was given, and the environment we gave it, gradually and then all at once, was one of constant, rapid, dopamine-laced micro-signals, each notification a tiny confirmation that the world had not forgotten you, that you were still visible, still relevant, still woven into the fabric of other people's days. Take those signals away, even briefly, even on a perfectly ordinary Saturday, and the brain does not rest. It panics quietly in the only language it knows. Here is what makes this particular discomfort so difficult to name, and therefore so difficult to hold honestly. It feels embarrassing. It carries the specific shame of a need that our culture has decided is small, is weak, is beneath the kind of person we're all trying to appear to be. We are supposed to want silence. We are supposed to crave disconnection, to speak longingly about weekends without screens, to perform a relationship with solitude that is graceful and chosen and zen. And so when the quiet arrives and it doesn't feel like peace, when it feels instead like being erased, we don't say that out loud. We sit with it privately, misidentifying it as boredom or restlessness or hunger or fatigue, reaching for anything that explains the sensation without naming the real thing underneath it. The real thing being this, somewhere along the way, without a single conscious decision, we outsourced our sense of social existence to a device. And now, when the device goes silent, some part of us genuinely doesn't know if we still exist in the same way. Not metaphorically. In the body, in the nervous system, in the place where certainty lives, we don't know. The body keeps a different kind of score than the mind does. The mind can reason its way through the silence. It's just a phone. It's just a Saturday. Nothing is wrong. And do so convincingly, at least on the surface. But the body is running older software that was never designed to distinguish between digital absence and social death. And so while the mind recites its reasonable reassurances, the body is doing something else entirely. The shoulders carry a tension that wasn't there an hour ago. The eyes move toward the screen with a frequency that has nothing to do with intention. The hands reach and retract in small, almost imperceptible movements, a restlessness that has no destination. There is a quality of waiting in the whole physical self, the specific posture of someone who is listening for a sound that isn't coming, poised at the edge of a response they haven't yet been given reason to make. This is what the notification void feels like from the inside. Not dramatic, not loud, just a persistent low-grade alertness that has nowhere to go, burning itself out slowly against the indifferent silence of a screen that has nothing new to say. And so we build architectures of artificial stimulation without ever calling them that. We leave the television on not to watch it, but to populate the silence with the suggestion of other voices, other lives, other rooms where things are happening. We scroll without reading, consuming the visual rhythm of content, the way you might run your hand along a wall in the dark, not looking for anything specific, just needing the reassurance of texture, of contact, of proof that the world has surface and dimension and is still, in fact, there. We send messages that are really just pings, social sonar disguised as conversation, bouncing our signal off other people to measure the distance between us and them and confirm that the distance has not become total. We like photos from 3 weeks ago on accounts we barely follow, not out of genuine appreciation, but out of a need to leave a mark somewhere, to press a fingerprint into the digital world and say, I was here. I passed through. I am still passing through. The void we have discovered can be filled with almost anything. The tragedy is how much energy we spend filling it and how briefly any of it works. There is a cruelty in the design that we rarely examine directly, because examining it requires admitting how completely it has worked on us. These systems, the platforms, the apps, the entire luminous ecosystem of connected life, were not built around our well-being. They were built around our attention, which is a different thing entirely, almost an opposite thing. And attention, the engineers learned early, is most reliably captured not by satisfaction, but by anticipation. Not by giving you what you want, but by making you perpetually, exquisitely uncertain about whether it's coming. The variable reward, the unpredictable interval, the notification that arrives sometimes and not others, following no pattern your conscious mind can decode, keeping the deeper parts of you in a state of permanent, low-level readiness. This is not an accident. This is architecture, and we live inside it the way fish live inside water, so completely surrounded by it that the idea of perceiving it as a structure, as something built, as something that could theoretically be built differently, requires an effort that feels almost unnatural. The void between notifications was engineered, and the anxiety that fills it was engineered too. But here is where it becomes genuinely strange, genuinely worth sitting within the dark with a cup of something warm and no screens nearby. The notifications we crave are not, for the most part, delivering anything of real substance. They are not letters from people who love us, carefully composed and full of meaning. They are not news that changes anything important. They are mostly small and disposable, a like, a reaction, a reply that says ha hey or yeah, or a single emoji that took 3 seconds to choose and 3 seconds to send. And yet the brain receives them with a seriousness, a relief, a quiet surge of something that feels indistinguishable from mattering. Because the content was never the point. The signal was always the point. The notification doesn't say here is something meaningful. It says someone thought of you. It says you crossed someone's mind and they moved toward you, however briefly, however lightly. And that crossing, that movement, that tiny gravitational pull of one person toward another is something the human nervous system has needed since before we had words for needing things. We are not addicted to our phones. We are addicted to the feeling of being thought of. The phone is just the most efficient delivery system we have ever built for that particular drug. Daniel eventually put his phone in another room, not as a grand gesture, not as a digital detox, with a beginning and an end and a sense of accomplishment waiting at the finish line. Just quietly, without ceremony, because he was tired of the weight of it sitting next to him like an unanswered question. And the first 20 minutes were, as he'd expected, uncomfortable in a way that had no clean edges. The restlessness moved through him in waves, the reaching impulse firing again and again into empty air, the silence of the other room feeling almost accusatory. But then, somewhere in the 35th or 40th minute, something shifted. Not dramatically, not with the cinematic clarity of an epiphany, just a small, almost imperceptible loosening, the way a muscle releases after being held tense for so long that the tension stopped feeling like tension and started feeling like normal. He noticed the quality of light coming through the window. He heard the specific sound his building made in the late afternoon, a low structural settling he had never registered before. It was still there, the world was still there, and nothing, it turned out, had required his attention in the 17 minutes he had spent not giving it. So perhaps this is the quietest, most unsettling truth the notification void has to offer us. Not that we are weak for needing the signals, but that we have forgotten what it feels like to exist without them. Somewhere between the first smartphone and this exact moment, we lost fluency in a language we used to speak naturally, the language of unwitnessed time, of hours that belonged entirely to us and required no documentation, no response, no proof of having occurred. There was a version of every one of us that knew how to sit in a waiting room without reaching for anything, that could take a walk and let the walk be just a walk, unreported and unrecorded and no less real for it, that understood in some wordless and embodied way that existing without being pinged was not the same as ceasing to exist. We have not lost that version of ourselves entirely. It is still there, underneath the reflexes and the rituals and the engineered anticipation, waiting with the patience of something that has never needed a notification to know it is alive. The void is not empty. It only feels that way because we forgot how to read the silence. Daniel came back to his phone eventually, as we all do. He had 3 notifications waiting. Nothing urgent, nothing that had required his immediate presence, nothing that had collapsed in his absence. The world had continued at exactly the pace it always moves, indifferent to whether he was watching. And he sat with that for a moment, really sat with it, turning it over like a stone found on a path. The realization that the void he had feared was never actually empty, and the silence he had fled was never actually hostile. It was just silence, the same silence that exists between heartbeats, between breaths, between one thought and the next, the silence that is not the absence of life, but the space in which life becomes audible if you are still enough to hear it. We will keep carrying our phones. We will keep feeling the pull of the unlit screen. We will keep, in our most honest and unguarded moments, reaching for the small bright signal that tells us we are still here, still seen, still part of the living current of other people's days. But maybe, in the spaces between the reaching, we can learn to remember that the current was always moving, that we were always in it, that no notification was ever needed to confirm what was already undeniably and entirely true. Psych Paradox is a documentary exploration space about the mysteries of the mind and the impact of the digital world. The content presented here is for educational and entertainment purposes only. I am not a doctor or mental health professional. If you are going through difficulties, seek qualified professional help.